Hello and welcome to my Jhin guide. My name is Tomorrow77, I'm currently ranked 10 on the OS Challenger leaderboard, and in this video I'm going to be telling you everything you need to know in order to succeed with Jhin. The main strength of this comp is that it's got a really high cap and you'd be surprised with some of the boards you can beat. The comp has a lot of CC, it's often uncontested, the items are relatively flexible as Jhin can use quite a lot of different items as well as you have a tank and AP carries, and it has relatively easy transitions if you play some of the openers that I'll later discuss. And the main weaknesses are that it's hard to play as you need to be careful with your positioning, it's weak to sins, and Jhin 1 is not stable, so your stage 4 can often be a little bit tricky and awkward. The main carry of course is Jhin, which you'll want to position in the back right corner or the back left. Now you can position him one away from the corner if there are a few blitzcrank players in the lobby, and the reason you don't want him centered is so that he gets more value out of his sniper. The sniper you run in this comp to support Jhin is Caitlyn. This is because she gives Enforcer when you solo frontline your Jace. You can run other snipers temporarily, but you're never running more than 2 sniper. Usually you don't hit Jace that early, so you'll want to 2-star your Braum and have him as your solo frontline. It's always Jace 2 over Braum 2, but if you're deciding whether or not to replace your Braum 2 with a Jace 1, you need to ask whether or not the Enforcer value is very high in your lobby. Remember that 2 Enforcer will enforce the unit with the most HP, so you can scout the lobby and figure it out from there. Also, if you don't have any tank items on your Braum, then swapping it for a Jace 1 will mean that Jace 1 will likely just die straight away, whereas Braum 2 will almost always get his cast off regardless. In the standard board you'll run 4 Clockwork, which means Orianna, Zilean and Camille get added. Ideally you get a Clockwork spat so that you don't have to run Camille, whereas Orianna's ult is huge and Zilean offers at least a little bit of CC. And then usually you're running Scholars, which ideally would be Yuumi and Janna. Janna's ulti is huge because it knocks enemies away as well as heals Jhin. This gives Jhin even more damage with his sniper bonus, so you always want to make sure that your Janna is positioned close to your Jhin. You don't actually have to have a Yuumi, obviously Yuumi is just the best because of her CC. You can also have a Lissandra which offers a decent amount of frontline. And if you get a sniper augment, then you just drop Caitlyn and run Seraphine. You want to make sure that Seraphine's ulting Jhin every single fight, this way he gets the extra attack speed which gets converted into AD. If you get a sniper spat on the other hand, then you just want to sniper your Orianna or your Seraphine depending on who has items. You always want to make sure that your Janna is next to your Jhin, however whether or not you clump so that everyone gets hit by the Seraphine ult is lobby dependent. If there's too much CC, then you want to make sure that your Orianna is not in a clump. Also keep in mind that Orianna ults the largest group, so therefore if you clump all of your units, Ori's ult will usually hit your allies, which counters synergizes with Janna's ult, which knocks them away, so it's often better that you don't clump your units, so Ori ults the enemy unit clumps instead. And if you don't get a Clockwork emblem, it can often be better to drop down to 2, which usually just means you can play Blitzcrank as well, as he gives Bodyguard for Braum and Scrap for Janna, and the Scrap gives a shield to all of your units, which is quite good too. Also, you can usually surprise people by adding in Blitzcrank later into the game and catching them off guard. And I don't recommend 5 Innovator Jhin, maybe as a mid-game board and then transition because the bear doesn't do very much, and 7 Innovator Jhin isn't very good either because that board caps a lot better if you use other units instead. Jhin can utilize a wide range of items and it usually just depends on lobby. A really good combination is IE Last Whisper plus Runins. Runins procs on his ulti and the Last Whisper and IE synergize really well together as you're lowering everyone else's armor, so this is just a good combo all around. I only ever run Last Whisper if I already have an IE, so without the IE the Last Whisper is not very useful. Deathblade's also really good on Jhin, you can run Runins Deathblade is a good combo, and then usually you can chuck 1 defensive item on him. The defensive items include GA, QSS and BT. QSS is quite nice because it allows you to put him in the far right corner, and this just means that he's doing more damage with his sniper bonus. GA is also really good because even when he goes into his ulti phase, if he dies, he'll still stay in his ulti phase so that when he comes back, he's shooting out those 4 massive shots. I don't really like BT, it's only really good if there's a lot of assassin players and they're jumping the backline, which means that he just needs that little bit extra shield, but the BT healing isn't actually that necessary as you can usually get healing from an augment, or with Seraphine and Janna, you have enough healing anyway. And Giant Slayer is by far best in slot if there's a decent amount of reroll players, bruiser players or Colossus users, which will be most games. And Braum can pretty much utilize any tank item. Of course you want to make tank items which fit to your lobby, but most of the time you're just going to be slamming whatever tank items you get early game, using that to streak and then later just throw them all on Braum. Sunfire Cape's good early for streaking, but Morello's is much better later, and you don't want to have both. Finally, you have your utility items, which just buff your team in general. You never prioritize these, however, if you get them on later carousels, then they definitely help out your team. Zeke's is really good for a faster cast on Seraphine and Orianna, and it gives Jhin a little bit more AD. Morello's is really good, you can put it on your Seraphine or your Orianna, basically whoever you 2-star first. and it can even go on Braum, and if you don't have Scholars in yet, Braum usually casts first just because he's taking extra damage, but it's usually better to just put all your tank items on him instead. Trap Claw is pretty important, especially when you're clumping. It's really good on Jhin as well because you can corner him and it just allows him to get more damage with his sniper bonus. Shojin is also another good utility item. You can put this on Orianna or Seraphine, just whoever you want to cast first. Usually it just depends. If the enemies are clumped, then you want Orianna to cast first, otherwise Seraphine's usually your go-to. And if you get stuck with extra AP items, Drill Gauntlet or Rabadon's is fine on either of the two AP carries. Something else that's quite significant is you don't actually care about Zilean or Camille 2-star, which means you can Shroud and Zephyr Cheese. Which means putting on the item 1 second before the fight starts just to guarantee that you hit, and then you can just sell your Camille or Zilean 2-star and replace it with a 1-star, as it doesn't really make a difference, and then you can do the exact same thing again. And at Carousel you always want to go for a sword and then bow or a glove. This is because Jhin items are your first priority every single time, then you go for defensive items. Starting off with Silver Tier, Bodyguard Heart is pretty good as you get a free Leona, and usually you're going to be running Braum anyway. You can run 2-star Leona as your solo frontline during your early and mid game boards as well. Clockwork Heart is S tier, Enforcer Heart's also pretty good. Scholar Heart's pretty good. You can just run Janna solo, or you can run 4 Scholar in some builds. Sniper Heart's really good, and Tristana's a great Jhin item holder. Late game you're only ever running 2 Sniper though. Socialite Heart's only good if it's back row or front and center for Jace. Ardent Sensor's only really good late game. Early game it doesn't do anything because you don't want to be running Enchanters anyway. Build different one's fine, you just go fast 7 and then roll down into an actual board. Calculated Loss is pretty good, just play the game normally and enjoy the free econ. Celestial Blessing's okay, but it's much better later rather than early. Cybernetics is okay early, but I would never really take it later. Dominance is okay if you have a strong opener early, otherwise it's not great. Duet is too much of a gamble, so I wouldn't really take it. Exiles is quite good because it's quite easy to spread out your units in this comp, and that little bit of extra shield is quite nice because your units are very squishy. First Aid Kit's really good later into the game, early game not so much. Hyper Roll is really good, it's insanely good early, and it's pretty decent at later stages of the game. Item Grab Bag's fine as you can use most items as well. Makeshift Armor's not great because you're solo frontlining your Braum and he'll usually have items on him anyway. Phony Frontline is really good in this comp because you're pretty much backlining all of your units. Sniper's Nest is okay, but you kind of need the ability to swap sides with Jhin, so I wouldn't recommend it. Stand United's good, especially if you only run 2 Clockwork, this way you can get a lot more synergies in. Thrill is really good early game, especially for streaking, and it's okay late game. Weak Spot's okay, and it means you don't need a Morello or Sunfire. Moving on to the gold augments, anything that I said about a silver augment, if it has a gold form, will be pretty much the same. Tome is okay, although it's a little bit of a gamble. Armor Plating's okay if the Socialite spot's good for Jhin, and you can just run Galio as your frontline instead. Binary Airdrop's quite good, as you just put 2 items on your Braum, Seraphine, Jhin, and then later on your Ori as well. Broken Stopwatch is S tier if you get it as your last augment, however early game it can be a little bit awkward. I'd only really pick this up early or second if you know you want to force this comp. And Built Different 2 does not work with this comp. Clear Mind's okay if you get it as your first augment, you just use it to go fast 8. Metabolic's good at all stages of the game just to secure your top 4. Rich Get Rich is really good as your first augment, you can either play aggressive with the gold or get to 50 gold and roll down at 6. Savage Bin's pretty good early, it just allows you to slam items and then you can remake them later. Late game don't take it if you don't need to remake anything though. Share the Spotlight's good if it's in the 3rd or 4th row. Sunfire board's good at all stages throughout the game as long as you don't have a Sunfire or Morello. Bodyguard Crown's good in an AD lobby, you just play full Bodyguard. Clockwork Soul is S tier. Enforcer Soul's really good, usually this means you just try and run 4 Enforcer. Scholar Soul is okay, although there's better options. Sniper Crown's really good, this is the only time you ever run 4 Sniper, where you just sniper your Seraphine and Orianna. 2 extra Socialite is good if it's in the back row. 2 TGs is good early for streaking, although late game it's not that amazing. Golden Ticket is really good if you get it later into the game, but as your first augment, you're basically playing down an augment, so it's quite bad. Item Grab Bag is okay, but there's definitely better options. Level Up is pretty good at all stages throughout the game. March of Progress is really good, it gives you a bunch of extra econ. Just make sure that you're rolling down at 6 and 7 in order to stabilize. New Recruit is a safe option to go with. Portable Forge is really risky, but if you take it as your last augment, there's actually quite a lot of items that suit this comp. In the early game you're playing strongest board, usually this will just be an Ezreal 2-star if you can get him, as he holds Jhin items really well. You can play pretty much any board that matches your items, but if you don't have any upgrades, then Talon is a great unit at saving HP because he almost always gets a kill. The standard leveling for this comp is 4 on 2-1 and 5 on 2-3. We're trying to conserve as much HP as possible, ideally with win streaking. This is because if you position poorly late game, you can lose more HP than you'd intend to. If you don't natural a strong board, you can play for Econ and go for Tristana instead. This way you can play Tristana with Yordles and generate a lot more Econ. Usually this means you'll be weaker unless you natural a 2-star Tristana in stage 2. But you can roll down at level 6 to get 2-star Tristana and you'll be stable until level 7. If you haven't naturaled any 2-cost 2-stars by stage 3, then usually on 3-1 or 3-2 I'll level to 6 and roll down. The 2-cost 2-stars that you're looking for are either Trundle or Tristana, as both of them are really good Jhin item holders. In this roll down here, I high roll a Jhin, so I can play it early. However, keep in mind that Tristana 2 is usually better than Jhin 1, as it's just a little bit more consistent. And the reason that I roll all the way down to 0 gold is because I know I'm playing Yordles from this spot, so I'll be able to rebuild my Econ that way. I get a little bit dizzy here, not knowing all of my options, but in the end decide that I'll swap it out at 3-2 and just run Jhin plus Tristana and Yordles. At stage 4-1, you go to 7 and roll deep for upgrades. You need to hit these upgrades, otherwise you're not going to be stable. The main reason that this comp is so difficult is because it takes a lot of skill to figure out when you're stable after your stage 4-1 roll down. Because if you miss and you need to keep rolling, then that's just how you play the comp. You can't just sit with a Jhin 1 and expect to go past level 8, as you'll probably just bleed out. It doesn't really matter what you play during your stage 4, as long as you roll down at 7, hit some upgrades, and those upgrades match your items. In this game I have a Jhin 1, however most of the time it's either going to be Tristana holding onto my items, or you can even use Trundle or Samira. At Raptors, you're leveling to 8 and rolling down for your board. You don't have to do this after Raptors, you can actually do it before, as the extra 5 gold that you would lose in terms of interest is definitely worth the extra time you get. It just depends on how confident you are with your ability to roll and how much you need to change your board. Obviously it's important to scout at all stages throughout the game, but now more than ever you need to make sure that Jhin isn't getting shrouded, he's not getting jumped on by assassins, and Yone isn't on the same side as him, so Yone just walks up and sends his ulti after Jhin. You also want to make sure that Jhin is diagonally opposite any of their backline carries, this way Jhin gets more damage through his sniper bonus, and keep in mind that Jin's shots will actually go through units, which is what makes him such a strong carry, as he can one-shot backline even though he's actually targeting the frontline units. You always have to have your Jhin and Seraphine in the corners, however Orianna can pretty much go anywhere, so if the socialite spot is in the 3rd row and you itemize your Ori, you can usually put her there without having any issues, but you never greed Jin's positioning for socialite if it's not in a good spot. And I can't stress this enough, positioning is everything with this comp. So if you're not already using a tracker like Meta TFT or Blitz.gg, then I highly recommend that you get one. This will show you your next 3 opponents. The algorithm's a little bit complicated, so it's better to just use the tracker, as they'll show you who you can and can't verse next. Orianna ults the largest clump of units, and Blitzcrank pulls in an extra unit, so if you clump your frontline, you can often use Blitzcrank to guarantee the location of Orianna's ult, or you can put Blitzcrank in the diagonally opposite corner to Jhin in order to increase Jin's damage due to sniper. If you purposefully position your clump of units so that it gets hit by non-lethal forms of damage such as Seraphine ulti, your units will actually ult faster, and because Janna ults, most of your units will go back up to full HP anyway. Just make sure that it's something like a Seraphine ulti that doesn't actually CC your units. In lobbies full of Challenger and Assassin players, you're not actually going to get much value out of Sniper because most of the enemy units will be on top of your Jhin. By nature, backline units are already squishy, so Jhin one-shots them fine anyway and doesn't actually benefit that much from Sniper. Therefore, you can just run an extra unit and drop the Caitlyn. Once you know which side you want your Jhin on, it's always important to have your Jhin on the wrong side during planning phase. This is because when other players are scouting, they'll see your Jhin on the other side and they might position accordingly. In really high elo, people might catch on to this and then you just want to swap it 50% of the time, but most of the time they won't be paying that much attention. And that is the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching my Jhin guide. I hope you found it helpful, and if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, or come follow me on Twitch and we can have a live discussion there. If you want to see anything, feel free to let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.